大家好，我是 Randy Osborne， 我是 Fine Fretted Strings de Nizusha. I started selling violins, cellos in the 1980s, but then focused on guitar, and I recently got back into focusing on selling violins. Violins are different than guitars. First of all, it's who made the instrument. That's the most important thing. The least important thing is the sound. The secondary thing is condition. Appraisers of violins can look at the back of the instrument and say, Stradivari made this instrument, Bergonzi made this instrument, Amati made this instrument. Just by looking with decades of experience, looking at the label is the last positive indication of who made it. Labels have been falsified for 330 years. The earliest violin makers only have 24 violins that exist from their decades of making. You had the guilds in Europe several hundred years ago to make these violins. You had to study with somebody. You couldn't just put up your own sign and say, okay, I'm now in business. The person that made that studied with somebody who studied with somebody, and that goes back 12 to 15 generations. So the violins that we revere today, that people pay thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, those are due to the proper instruction hundreds of years ago. So foreign languages are very important for research, so I don't have to wait for somebody to translate it, or I don't have to load up Google Translator with all the words of a paragraph to know what I'm doing. I started learning French in 1993. It was my third language, Spanish being my second language. Chinese is my ninth language. When I'm not buying violins, I'm buying research material to know what I'm looking at. Generally, when these things are made, if it says Germany, then I go, okay, 1891 to 1914, possibly 1921. When it says made in Germany, made in Czechoslovakia, etc., then that means it's going to be, for Germany, it's going to be after 1914 or 1921. If it says made in Czechoslovakia, that means it's made after 1918, because Czechoslovakia wasn't a country with that name. And you learn other things, like if you see like this cello over here, that says made in Czechoslovakia, the one with no strings. But the V is a W, Czechoslovakia with a W instead of a V. That means it's made between 1918 and 1921. After 1921, all the labels had a V and not a W. So it's a combination of my knowledge, as well as consulting with colleagues of mine that have a lot of experience. I'm always asked, where do I get my instruments that I sell? And I always say private parties. I'm always buying violins or cellos, whether or not I have a sale that week. I have probably 200 violins that are not in my store. So eventually I'll set those up, do a repair that it needs, or a couple repairs. I put $500 strings on my cellos. It makes them sound like $1 million. I learned a lot of my current luthier skills for working on violins from a gentleman named Dolph Peyer. He was a rock star in the 1950s. He was the drummer for a very famous person named Duane Eddy and the Rebel Rousers. I met Dolph when Dolph was about 78 years old, and he helped me immensely on repairs of cellos, violins, violas, helped me learn how to make pegs. Before that, I had other shops do the work for me. Now I save the money, and the money goes back into buying more violins, cellos, and violas. I studied with Dolph from 8 to 10 o'clock Tuesday mornings, and I videotaped 32 two-hour classes with him. He'd show me how to make bridges. He'd show me how to do repairs, how to make a neck so it was like butter to the thumb. It would, you get rid of the varnish, and you'd use about 8 different grades of sandpaper and micro mesh, and you can make it, and it just feel like you're gonna slide down a banister on a stairway. I love working, so I've had 3 vacations since 1980. Just because I have a store with hundreds of thousands of dollars of violins, handmade Spanish guitars, etc., doesn't mean times have always been great. Just like we have slowdowns in economies, in 2006 when gas went to $3.50 a gallon. I remember having 3 customers in 17 days, and they came in and spent $100 in 17 days. Other costs, you have rent, you have shop insurance, you have security, you have phone cost, internet, so I can check orders that come in off my website. I teach, and the teaching money goes into instruments. I spend my Social Security money. Everything that's left after bills, that goes into buying violin family instruments. The guitar sales have leveled off where there are very few compared to years ago. And so there's been times when I've had to kind of just pinch my pennies, as we say, and stop buying. But times are good now. I also had great times back in what we call the dot-com boom. But violins are very popular. At times I have back-to-back customers where somebody came in, said, "Oh, I bought this cello from you a year ago, and I want to trade it in and get a bigger size one. I've outgrown the 3/4 size cello. I need a 4/4 cello." When you are in Maygoa, I invite you to my store. You're very welcome to play Shao Ti Chin, Da Ti Chin, Zhang Ti Chin, Xie Xie Ning.